Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Human Resources in History. This podcast aims to offer insights from 7,000 years of human history to help modern human resource practices. I'm your host, Jin. I'm an HR professional, and I love history. The script of this podcast is generated using AI, and it's based on our blog post which we published a few weeks ago under the same topic. This voice is a synthetic clone of my real voice, and it is generated using AI. Now that's out of the way, let's jump into today's topic. This is a fascinating one. William the Conqueror's Domesday Book, an ancient database project that gives us some great insights into how people analytics can be applied in HR today. All right, before we dive into the Domesday Book itself, let's rewind a bit and explore the historical backdrop that made it necessary in the first place. England, in the centuries leading up to William the Conqueror's reign, was anything but peaceful. In fact, it was marked by constant power struggles between two dominant groups, the Anglo-Saxons and the Vikings. So, starting in the late 8th century, the Vikings, those seafaring warriors from Scandinavia, began raiding and eventually conquering large parts of England. This era, known as the Viking Age, saw England fall into chaos as Viking forces controlled significant regions, especially in the north and east. The area they dominated was even known as the Danelaw, because it followed Viking laws rather than English ones. Things started to shift when Alfred the Great, a king of Wessex, pushed back in the late 9th century. Alfred managed to defend the southern part of England and set the stage for his descendants to slowly reclaim more land from the Vikings over the next few decades. But just when it seemed like the Anglo-Saxons might restore stability, another twist came. In the early 11th century, a Danish king named Knut, also known as Canute the Great, came to power and ruled over not only England, but also Denmark and Norway. For a while, England was part of this massive northern empire. But after Knut's death, and a brief reign by his son, Harthacnut, Knut, the throne passed back to the Anglo-Saxons under Edward the Confessor. Now, Edward ruled for a good stretch, but here's where things get complicated again. Edward died in 1066 without leaving an heir. This opened the door to a full-blown succession crisis. There were several claimants to the throne, but the two most important ones were Harold Godwinson, an Anglo-Saxon noble, and William, Duke of Normandy, who lived in what is now northern France. And here's where William's story gets interesting. You see, even though he was a Norman, which might sound like a whole different group, William was actually descended from Vikings himself. His ancestor, Rollo, had been granted land in northern France by the French king in exchange for defending the area from further Viking attacks. This region became known as Normandy, which literally means land of the Norsemen. So, in a way, William had Viking blood running through his veins too. In 1066, William crossed the English Channel with his army, defeated Harold Godwinson at the famous Battle of Hastings, and claimed the English throne. From then on, he became known as William the Conqueror, the first Norman king of England. And while it might seem like an outsider had taken over, William's heritage made it a bit more complex than that. England's new king was, in fact, a descendant of Viking raiders who had once terrorized the very land he now ruled. With William now in charge, he needed to figure out exactly what he had just won. The land was divided into different regions, ruled by various lords, and still recovering from centuries of invasions and internal conflicts. So, in 1085, William commissioned what would become one of the most famous documents in English history, the Domesday Book. All right, now that we've got a clearer picture of the power struggles, William's rise to the throne, let's talk about the Domesday Book itself. This database project that was way ahead of its time. So, in 1085, William had been ruling England for nearly 20 years, But even after all that time, he still didn't have a full understanding of the land he controlled. And as any ruler knows, knowledge is power. William needed detailed information not just for governance, but more critically for taxation. Wars are expensive, and defending a kingdom as large as England required serious funds. So, at a Christmas court in 1085, William made a big decision. He ordered a survey of the entire kingdom. And not just any survey, but one that was so thorough, it left no room for dispute. That's where the name Domesday comes from. Like Doomsday, the final judgment, because once it was recorded in this book, that was it. No appeals, no second chances. The scope of the Domesday Survey was truly remarkable for its time. William sent royal officers out to every corner of the kingdom, known as the shires, to collect information on who owned what, how much land they controlled, what resources were available, and the value of everything. And so what's even more impressive, this massive undertaking took less than 100 days to complete. I mean, think about that. Back then, there were no modern tools, no databases, no computers. Just people on horseback traveling from village to village, talking to landowners and scribes and recording all this information by hand. It's kind of mind-blowing when you consider the scale and the speed at which they worked. The data collected was eventually compiled into 2 separate volumes, Little Domesday, which covered the eastern counties of England, and Great Domesday, which covered the rest of the kingdom. Together, these 2 books recorded everything from the number of households to the total value of the land to who the local lords were. You could say it was a medieval census, but with a specific focus on land ownership and resources, since that's what William really cared about, figuring out who owed him taxes and how much they could pay. Now, even though it's over 1,000 years old, the Domesday Book has remained relevant for centuries. It wasn't just a one-time project to help William collect taxes. It became a vital administrative tool that was used for legal purposes, helping settle disputes over land ownership. And for historians today, the Domesday Book is like a time capsule that gives us an incredibly detailed glimpse into what life was like in medieval England. We can see how society was structured, what resources were available, and even which areas were thriving or struggling at the time. Want to see it for yourself? Well, thanks to modern technology, you actually can. There's an online project called the Open Domesday, where you can explore the actual entries and get a feel for what was recorded. If you're into history, you should definitely check it out. It's a pretty amazing resource, isn't it? Now, let's put this in context with today's HR. In modern HR, we call this people analytics, the practice of collecting and analyzing data about people to solve business problems. Back in William's time, he needed data to run his kingdom effectively. Today, HR professionals need data to run their organizations efficiently. Okay, so what can we learn from William's little data project? First off, it teaches us that people analytics isn't just about gathering data for the sake of it, it's about solving real problems. For William, the problem was straightforward. He needed to figure out how to collect taxes and manage his newly conquered land. Today's HR professionals might be more focused on solving issues like employee turnover or figuring out which teams are the most productive. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine your company is losing employees and you don't know why. The first step is to ask yourself, is this turnover actually a problem? If it is, say, because it's affecting revenue or team morale, then it's time to dig into the data. People analytics can help you figure out who's leaving, why they're leaving, and maybe even predict who's going to leave next. Now, another cool takeaway from the Domesday Book is the importance of data structure. In William's survey, the land was divided into regions called shires, and the surveyors recorded details like how many households there were, how much land, who owned what, and even the value of everything. Sounds a lot like how we organize employee data in modern HR systems, right? Think about your HR software with fields like job titles, salaries, years of experience. That's your modern-day Domesday Book. William's team collected and organized this info fast, like really fast for medieval times, in under 100 days. This structured approach to data is something HR professionals can learn from. It makes gathering and analyzing data easier and way more efficient. But even the best systems have gaps. The Domesday Book wasn't perfect. Some big places like London were not included at all. There were practical reasons, of course. London was huge and complex, and other areas like Durham had special tax privileges that made them tricky to survey. This teaches us another lesson for HR. You're probably never going to capture every single person in your system. You might miss freelancers or contractors, or maybe even part-time employees if the system isn't set up correctly. We talked about this in the episode number 7, The Inevitable Exclusivity, so check it out if you are interested. Anyway, what's the good way to catch those gaps? Well, you can compare your HR data with your finance system, look at the personnel costs in the budget, and see if it matches the headcount in your system. If there's a mismatch, you've probably got people falling through the cracks. So, to wrap it all up, William the Conqueror's Domesday Book shows us that gathering data is about solving real problems. Structuring your data is key to efficiency, and no matter how thorough you are, you're probably going to miss a few things. But even with those gaps, data can give you a clearer picture of your organization and help you make better decisions. It was true 1,000 years ago, and it's still true today. That's it for today's episode of Human Resources in History. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed this time-traveling look at the roots of people analytics. If you found this episode interesting, check out our blog where we dive deeper into topics just like this one. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and see you next time. Bye.